Short steps, small basement, modest house in northern Missouri. She's 5, the memory goes. Her sister, 4. There's a girl in a zipper bag in the basement, her face covered with matted hair. It smells like fish.
I know my sister and I would always play in bags after that. Like we'd get in bags and like zip ourselves up and kind of reenact it, you know. It was something that was very real in my life, and I just don't know what it was.
The secret she never talks about, she doesn't dare. Who knows? Her ex-husband, her therapist, and me. She's never brought it up to her sister, who now, in her 50s, can't remember anything before the age of 18.
But the problem is, she could never remember, I could never forget.
5 long and expensive years of therapy have helped this woman to realize this teenage girl she dreamed about for most of her life was real. "You'll never forget me," the girl would say in the nightmare, as she slid under the bed, and then would break into a million pieces, over and over and over, until one night, in the haze of a dream, the teenage girl gave a hug and said goodbye. But for Jeanette Robbins, the thought of this girl, who she was, how she ended up in the family's basement, how she died, has never gone away. Jeanette would search the internet every so often, keywords missing, girl, Missouri. This girl very much still haunts Jeanette, who also is now in her 50s. And when we went to visit the house in Holt's Summit, Missouri, I believed her, no doubt. The panic attack Jeanette had in that basement was very, very real. June 2020. My team with the Toll podcast got an email. The woman, Jeanette, said many news agencies had tried to cover her story in the past, something she never wanted. But for several reasons, it all fizzled. But she heard our series on a girl who was abducted and murdered in Springfield, Missouri in 1975, and wondered if this could have been the girl in the basement. Probably not, she determined. Shirley Jane was 9. The girl in her home was older. Besides, it wouldn't make sense for her dad to take Shirley Jane from the southern portion of the state and bring her home in northern Missouri, so far away. And then later, Jeanette hears that Shirley Jane was found dead in a shallow grave near Springfield. So not her. But Jeanette kept listening to the series for another reason. She was hooked on my storytelling. She related to my own challenges growing up in a broken home. And she felt, after all these years, it was time to try one more time. When I first spoke with Jeanette Robbins on the phone, we were both nervous. I had no idea what she was about to tell me. She just said she had a story she'd like to share.
I have this little obsession. First of all, I want to, frame this in that I'm a director at a college. I'm an intelligent woman, and I've lived my life to try to prove that at some point, I guess. But having said that, I was not raised by parents that were completely okay.
The call lasted 31 minutes, and for most of it, she talked about her father, the girl in the basement, the fact that she's still searching for answers nearly 5 decades later, not even knowing if her father was involved. But then I learned there's another story here. Oh, those people with Dateline, 48 Hours, and crime reporter Michelle McNamara, forever linked to the Golden State Killer, they weren't after the story about the girl. No, Jeanette tells me her mother was investigated by the FBI for 4 years for poison. It's okay, some within her Mormon family would say. Heavenly Father is ready to explain it all away on the other side. There's no need to worry. There are so many twists in this story, so many families affected, And so many who are speaking out for the first time. Husbands, family, friends, business partners, all so sick. And some died. Was Jeanette's theory, looking back on her life as a whole, correct? She's wrestled for decades with the thought that her mom may have hurt people.
It's a story that cannot die with me. Wouldn't it be fabulous if this were a series of unfortunate events? I love my mother, but she's dangerous to my family. If I don't speak up, am I complicit in all of this? She truly needed me to be sick, and I just didn't understand. I feel like I'm betraying my mother if I say something, but I'm betraying everyone else if I don't. I need to evacuate this from my soul.
Or was her mother the target of an unwarranted investigation? Was the whole thing merely a misunderstanding?
I spent 3.5 years working so hard to keep Bruce alive.
I'm in this caregiver situation, and it's a very difficult role.
I hope that you exhume all of the bodies that are necessary, because there is nothing in any of them.
It's not because I'm trying to hide anything. I don't want there to be 3 people on Earth that I could ever have done anything.
Well, that's why I'm trying to talk to you.
Yeah.
So that I could ask you questions so it doesn't play on me, because I know that I'm not crazy.
The first time I met Jeanette, we were 6 months into the pandemic. We met at my producer's house in Springfield, Missouri. Jeanette made the drive from Texas. She talked about stopping at a casino on the way up, winning a little bit of money and giving $100 to a girl who said she needed help. Probably got scammed, Jeanette said with a little laugh. She handed me a family picture. There are a lot of people in this picture, and tags on some signifying illness. I was anxious to show her this bulletin board I'd put together, a handmade flowchart featuring several family members and red dots next to the names of loved ones who got sick or died. Jeanette looked at it for only a few seconds. She put her hand to her chin and said, "It's a nice start." I think I had like 8 or 9 red dots on that chart at the time. I could feel my eyes widen. My mind was racing. I told her I'd be happy to make special accommodations for COVID precautions. And she laughed again, reassuring me that that wouldn't be necessary. She said something along the lines of her body being tough after all she's been through. Before Jeanette Robbins got to the home studio, I was joking with my friend that if this woman with a big story brought cookies or snacks, we were not to touch them. "No," he said, hands open, palms down, making a big swinging X with his arms. I would later learn how hurtful this topic was to Jeanette. The only reference I had prior to meeting Jeanette was a blog she'd taken part in on Websleuths. It's an internet community that's focused on crime and missing persons. There were, I think, 27 threads. Each thread had many pages. Some had 6, some had 12, a lot of messaging. And I went through it for 2 weeks straight. I made folders for the different family members and events and had as much lined out as I could. We hunkered down and started talking. And it's where we stayed for nearly 7 hours. Have you ever had a drug slipped into your drink or thought it had been tampered with? You ever felt like someone was trying to force you to eat something? Have you seen that picture on social media of the fast food workers stepping into the bins of lettuce? That feeling of vulnerability? It's real, right? Gypsy Rose Blanchard, the young woman now famous for plotting with her boyfriend to kill her mom who kept her sick. That happened where I live, Springfield, Missouri. As a news reporter, I covered that story from start to finish. Coverage would have sounded something like this. Sheriff Jim Arnaud says the two then hopped a bus to Wisconsin. She could walk, carry her luggage, and seemed physically fine.
This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception.
I remember Gypsy and Dee Dee outside by our station tent before a concert. Gypsy was wearing a big hat, she had no front teeth, in her wheelchair, taking pictures with us. I'm sure I was talking to her like she was a little kid. She was probably actually 20 or so at the time. It's weird. She's out of prison now. You've seen her. Munchausen by proxy, a parent or caregiver keeping a person sick. Attention. Control. This is The Toll. Season 2, Poison, Control. It's tragic, really.
I don't believe in coincidence.
We all have a story.
Nobody was able to make it because everybody was sick.
A dark secret wrapped in emptiness and regret.
Within a year, her entire nuclear family died.
You know.
Tons and tons of chemicals.
The Toll. I'm Nancy Simpson. As I dug through everything, the hundreds of emails and documents, more thoughts came flooding in. What if this Mormon mom and grandma with Missouri roots, who has moved across the West repeating the words, "I do," is a serial killer? What if this woman's one true love is keeping people sick? What if, after a 4-year FBI investigation, this woman got away with murder? On the other hand, what if this woman is innocent? Remember, poison is tricky. Jeanette, the daughter, has a quest to simply know the truth. That's basic human drive, right? To know where you came from, to know what has shaped you into the person you are today. She's left trying to fill in holes, gaps, and dissecting lies. I said, I'll tackle it. I went from, ooh, there's so much here to work with, to go through, to, oh my God, there's so much here to go through. This story has consumed many years of my life because I, too, want to know the truth. Jeanette says an FBI agent once asked her,
How in the world could this much activity be going on around one woman and no one say anything?
Let's bring it to light. All of it. And see where it goes. It's so hard for me to determine where to start this story. From the beginning, husband number 1, and then work to present day, the last husband to die, and then work back from there. There's just so much to tell. And I asked my sister, what if Jeanette's full of shit? She replied, meh, still a good story. But what if her mom is simply strange? That's not against the law. So, I had to just pick a spot to start. And we're going to start here. Jeanette's awakening happened during her mother's marriage to husband number 3. Bruce Fulford answered an ad, back then a message board. His son David recalls that his dad was having a great time dating around and then answered this online ad from a Mormon singles group.
My dad had this personality, so to me at the time I thought that this woman kind of intrigued him because she had this ad that I think the headline was talking about killing first husband, maybe making the second husband go crazy, looking for the third. And so I think we all laughed about that, thinking that this woman maybe had a personality that could match my dad's wit.
It took us months to convince David to talk to us. And I get it. I mean, if the FBI didn't charge her, making accusations isn't safe. My sister, who works behind the scenes for The Toll, Pamela, was able to explain that if you simply tell the truth about what happened to your family as you remember it, that's all we can do as we work to peel back the hundreds of layers on this story. That he could get behind. And when you learn David found out his father's wife was being investigated by the FBI mere hours before he had to give the eulogy at his dad's funeral and console a woman who wasn't crying, whew, you can feel how much he too wants answers. Jeanette had so many questions for her mom, now looking back, on events leading up to this realization that her mother may have been hurting and killing family members and others who stumbled into her mom's life. What happened to husband number 2? Why did he suddenly go crazy? What happened to Jeanette's dad? Why did he get so sick and die so young? Jeanette takes a hard look at her own mystery illnesses. So many specialists, every one of them baffled. Same for David and others. I wondered, is this beyond statistical belief? So many baffled doctors, rare illnesses, kidney, breast, and blood cancers, and autoimmune diseases for so many in this woman's circle. Jeanne Howard Spriggs, Forgy Fulford Sykes, was investigated by the FBI from 2006 to 2010. She was never charged. This converted Mormon mother and grandmother is currently living in California with husband number 4. Bruce, husband number 3, was from Michigan. His health had been a challenge. When he showed up for their first date in Utah, where Jeanne lived, she wanted to trick him. She rented a fat suit and sported a muumuu, black with white polka dots. When he walked into the Chamber of Commerce, where Jeanne worked, he grabbed his heart and fell back into a chair. Jeanette, the daughter, she was there. Jeanette's baby was just weeks old, but her mom begged her to come videotape it and take pictures. Oh yeah, there's pictures. Jeanne all costumed up, big smile. It's September 1999. Before they left for their date in the mountains, Jeanette says her mom commented that she couldn't date Bruce. He brought with him a big bag of different medicines, and she didn't want to fuss with all that. But when they came down from the mountain, Jeanne announced they were engaged. Yes, same night. They roasted marshmallows. Bruce told her that he had millions in UPS stock, and Jeanne, she popped the question. Proposed. Done. The wedding plans, her daughter says, they came together very quickly.
He himself said, well, we're getting married. Looks like we're getting married at Christmas. And we were like, that's a little fast. And he said, well, your mom's pushing it. She's the boss. So he was sending her money within a week of meeting her the first time. He would send her money throughout that fall and help her through whatever she was needing.
Bruce has 6 adult children. David, his son, well, he says they accepted Jeanne into their lives because their dad loved her. But yes, every once in a while, red flags went up. And it all hits different now.
You know, it was kind of funny because he met this woman, and it kind of changed from that moment on because it seemed like she was kind of controlling him, and he was told that he was supposed to get rid of all of these other files and stop talking to all these other women, and that is when he told us about this woman in Utah that he was going to go meet. I think he met her once, and I think that we were told just after that one initial visit that they were getting married, and it's kind of shocking to us because my dad had just started enjoying life again, and then he was, telling us that he was getting married, and in fact, he was getting married very soon, which was also concerning to us.
When Jeanette confronted her mother, Jeanne, she saw a side of her mom she'd never seen before.
When she was at my house, she was standing at the doorway, and she had her purse on. She was saying goodbye to me, something about Bruce. And I was across the living room, and I said, it just seems like you're marrying him for his money. And she turned around and made eye contact with me, set her purse down, walked slowly across the room, and got eyeball to eyeball with me and said, if I opt for financial security, that is my business. And she pointed her finger right in my chest. That is my business. And she turned around and walked out. I remember looking up something about masks and masks coming off because I was taking a master's class in psychology right then. And I thought, did I just see the mask fall off? Who is this woman? I'd never heard her say anything like that before.
Right before the wedding, Jeanette went down.
When we were in Missouri, she kept saying, are you nursing? You need to stop nursing. Are you nursing? You need to stop nursing. And she asked me again when we got back to Missouri, she goes, you need to stop because, and I said, no, nursing is good for your baby. And she goes, no, because you're sick. You need to not nurse. So as soon as I told her, okay, I stopped, I took a dive. I went down. And I don't know why that happened, but I was having issues with my speech. I couldn't see. I was falling down. I would just be standing like on the porch saying goodbye to somebody and just fall on the porch. I was pooping my own pants. My husband like bound up my foot with a bunch of gauze, and my toe was twitching so hard that he could still feel it twitching through the binding. So I went to the doctor, my same doctor that I worked with, and he said, "You have got the most severe case onset of multiple sclerosis that I've ever seen in my life. You are going to be fully disabled within the next 10 years or more rapidly if we don't get you started on some medication right away. But for some reason, your MRIs and your spinal tap are fine for MS."
Jeanette says during this time she couldn't see red and green colors at times and had a couple of episodes of hallucinations. She says she was trying to get out of a moving car with her then husband driving. She yelled for Matt to hold her as she saw herself leaping in front of a truck over and over. After being separated from her mother, Jeanette has never had another episode like that. Jeanette points out that her urine smelled like peanuts at times. She says it's how she knew she was about to get sick.
I went from taking care of 2 children and being fine and healthy to not being able to get out of my bed. When I wanted to use the phone one time, I had to get on my belly and crawl over to the phone. My mother had come to visit me one time, and she said, "You know, we're going to get you a handicap sticker for your car." And I said, "I will crawl on my belly from the back of the parking lot before you ever put a handicap sticker on my car. And I'd appreciate it if you'd stop saying I'm handicapped. I'm not handicapped." And she said, "I know you're a fighter." I was on my bed, lying down. She stroked my hair with her right hand as she was leaning over me. And she said, "I know you're a fighter, but you're not going to win this one."
Matt, her now ex-husband, was busy with school, and Jeanette needed help with the kids.
I ended up in a wheelchair on my way to Seattle, and I missed their wedding. And as soon as I got to Seattle, my mother-in-law said, "You're not really as sick as what I thought you were going to be." And while I crawled up on my belly into her house, I walked out on 2 legs and was doing fine by the time I was done in Seattle.
In what time span?
A few weeks.
Matt says it was noticeable.
She had gotten better somewhat anyway.
Jeannie and Bruce were married 3 months after meeting. Jeanette says things were fine for a while, but then she witnessed a fight between the couple. Bruce was saying that Jeannie only married him for his money. After that, Bruce started getting sick with severe stomach problems, throwing up, and diarrhea, and started losing a lot of weight. We're talking like 60 pounds in 6 months. His son, David, says everyone noticed a difference.
Like, my dad was a caretaker, and he loves people. He loved being around people. He loved being around family. There were times where it just seemed like my dad wasn't himself. Like, he just seemed unhappy or on edge or just kind of cranky. And it just kind of seemed a little, I don't know, out of place. There were times, too, he would make comments. I guess maybe there were some times that were not so happy. He joked around about, it seemed like a joke at the time about her. He thought married her for his money.
David says he feels silly now, looking back.
There were several things that she said about previous husbands and things. Something about being the unluckiest person because the husbands keep dying or people keep dying around her. But, you know, she always said that with, you know, like a laugh and a little cackle afterwards and joking around. And I don't know that any of us really kind of put 2 and 2 together or thought that that was kind of odd. Well, I mean, it's an odd statement to say. I shouldn't say that, but just it didn't, I don't think it hit me at the time.
David recalls family functions where everyone was throwing up or suffering from severe stomach problems.
There's no easy way to say it, but it was like explosive diarrhea, throwing up. I always used to remember, too, like it wasn't like a normal. It always had like a color to it to me that where I was like, this just is so weird. It's not a normal kind of loose stool or anything. It was, I always remember in my head of this like, just like a darker kind of color that it seemed like I was always sick with.
Jeanette's sleep study business in Utah was taking off at this point. She'd been so sick throughout this time frame. 11 MRIs and diagnosed, and treated for multiple sclerosis. It was grueling and expensive. She went to the Mayo Clinic for a week in 2002. She refused to believe she had MS and paid out of pocket to see those specialists. Looking over her medical report, I see her doctors were baffled and gave her no real diagnosis. They determined she did not have MS. When I spoke to Matt, her then husband, he told me that was a relief, but Jeanette had been suffering so much. Expensive medicines wrecked her.
Like when she would be on the medicine, it would get her really sick, and then she started feeling better, and then it was like over a year. I want to say it was like a year and a half. And she went through this weekly treatment and just struggled with what we thought was MS.
Severe weakness, leg drag, migraines. She tried to hide how sick she was to those around her. In her Mayo Clinic report, I see Jeanette talk to specialists about her strained relationship with her father and his sudden death at 47. The doctor wrote, "I would note that she has been watching her children grow up and might be particularly sensitive to seeing her daughter grow up." Jeanette says her mother seemed to get great joy from her being so ill. Jeanette says her mother pushed to go to those doctor's appointments. Jeanette said no, so she says her mom called every day to see what they had found. Jeanette says her mom seemed disappointed Jeanette was stopping those harsh steroids she was taking for the MS. No final diagnosis from Mayo, just a recommendation to go home and start prolonged psychotherapy to recover abuse memories. The doctor wrote, "It is quite possible that her current syndrome is connected to these issues." Jeanette says her primary doctor later wrote a letter to the FBI saying everything he witnessed in Jeanette throughout her MS treatment could be attributed to poison. Jeanette says he felt terrible. It never crossed Jeanette's mind until Bruce, husband number 3, came into her life. Christmas 2002, Jeanette tells me, looking back, there was a lot of sickness.
My niece was standing there cutting carrots. I think she was 11 or 12 then. She was cutting some kind of vegetables for the salad, and she grabbed onto the cabinet or the countertop and started swaying, and I believe she fell down. Other people were not feeling well, and then about half of the people at Christmas were violently throwing up in the bathrooms. Luckily, they had a lot of bathrooms, or several bathrooms. But on the way home, as we were leaving, we passed Brigham City and had to pull over to the side of the road, so about 30 minutes away. And my daughter, the second child, started throwing up, just looked like coffee grounds. It was deep brown, horrible stuff on the side of the road. It was very scary, and it's sad to say that we were so used to having people throw up sometimes. I just knew the color was weird, and I wasn't sure what, but we didn't take her to the doctor. We were just like, oh my gosh, everybody got so sick at Christmas. But she's the one in our family that got it.
David, Bruce's son, he gives me a similar story.
There was a case where a lot of us were sick. Some of the visits kind of blend together because there was just like that constant illness.
It was Thanksgiving 2005. Jeanette was at her mom and Bruce's house in Utah. She went with her husband, Matt, and their 3 kids. Other family members from Jeanne, the mom's side, were there. Her adult children and grandkids were all at the house. Jeanette hadn't been feeling well, but again had been working so hard to hide it.
So everything was all nice and fine, and we were just laughing and the kids playing, and Bruce was even in a good mood on the couch. And so I said, you know what would be cool? Let's use Grandma's salt and pepper shakers. She said, oh, okay. They're right up there. So she pointed up to some tall cabinet. We got them down, and they were empty, of course. And I said, okay, so where's your salt? And she was frying something, and then she stopped And she put her hands in front of her and she goes, just a second. And she kind of stepped away. And I said, okay, I just need your salt so I can put them in the salt and pepper shakers. And she kept kind of stirring. And then Bruce said something and she goes, what? And kind of the mood started changing. And I said, Mom, where's your salt and pepper shakers? Where's your salt and pepper so I can put them in the shakers? And she goes, just a minute. And she was stirring something. And then she walked over to the cabinet. She was standing right in front of it, which was right by the stove. And I leaned across, like very sarcastically. I was just being really silly. And I leaned across and I go, so where's your salt, Mom? Like it was a big deal. And she goes, just a minute, I'm thinking. And her hands were shaking. They were in the air and they were by her head. And she was just staring at the cabinet. And so she reached her right hand out, pulled the cabinet open, and there were a whole bunch of salt and pepper shakers all lined up, all with red tops. And she started her finger running along, and I go, whoa, which one do you want to choose? And she goes, just a minute. And then she reached out to one and selected it very carefully, and she goes, this one. And then she opened it up and there was a bunch of like gray ball, black, weird stuff in the salt on the top. And she goes, oh, this one, no. And she put it down and the lid was half on it and it was just overstuffed. And she goes, this one, it fell and I scooped the salt back in and it got a bunch of dirt or something in there. We don't want to use this one. And so I was in shock when I saw her doing that. So then she put her finger up again and was scanning and she goes, now this one, and then she stopped on one and she picked it up and she goes, this one, and she opened it and she goes, this is a good one. Use this one. And then she handed it to me. And so I went, what was that? I didn't say anything to her. I just was in shock. I didn't understand what was happening. And then Bruce was needing help, so she had to take him to his room. She goes, just a second, I'll be back. And so I started digging. I pulled open the one with all the weird gray balls of brown stuff, and I was trying to dig through it and see what was in there. And then the other salt, and some of it spilled. I couldn't get it back in there. And I'm like, am I insane? What am I doing digging through my mother's salt? So I just put it back down and put some water over the stuff that had fallen in the sink, and that was that.
But you felt in the moment something was off.
Oh, it was like a moment I'll never forget in my life, and it was probably a moment I really needed to actually physically see that. Yeah.
In a 26-page report Jeanette wrote for the FBI during their investigation, Jeanette described the substance in the small jars as grayish balls or different dark-colored looking things on top of the salt and encrusted into the side where the lid screws on. She goes on to write, the next morning after Thanksgiving, I couldn't even wake up well. I slept until lunchtime. I got really sick during the next week or so and had a couple of seizure-like episodes, one where I actually had convulsions of some type for the first time in my life. It was quite scary. I lost my muscle strength, and even to lift pans to cook dinner was difficult. It was the worst attack I'd suffered in 6 years, but very different because I'd never had convulsions before. I didn't tell anyone at my office that I was weak. And don't forget, Jeanette was reluctant to complain since the Mayo Clinic told her it was likely all in her head. At some point, a skull and crossbones sticker was put on one of the jars with the words, "This is my poison." In an email I have from 2013, Jeanne writes that she didn't know one of the salt shakers had that sticker on it, says her son-in-law did it, and that Jeanne only found out about it because Bruce's daughter discovered it. Someone said no, Jeanette's sister put it on there. Anyway, at Christmas time, Jeanette was back in her mother's house trying to look for the salt containers, but they were gone. She says there was an area carved out, left empty, where all the jars of salt used to sit in the cabinet. This is when Jeanette called a private detective for help. Mark Nozak, a private investigator in Utah. I tried reaching him. Jeanette was finally able to get a hold of his wife, who said he was suffering from a brain tumor and couldn't help with his project. He later died. Jeanette says Mark was a tall man, about 6'5", and she says very direct. She found him in the Yellow Pages. He was with the LAPD for many years and moved to become the chief of police in Sandy, Utah, and the police chief in Murray, Utah. He had trained officers across the state on interrogating and interviewing suspects. His online ad says, "I'm a crusty old cop who's had the possibility to stick my head into hell and spit. I've shot people and fought people and chased them at crazy speeds. I've solved homicides and rapes and robberies and bike thefts. Honesty and integrity are my most important qualities. I specialize in criminal and corporate investigations. If I see you're chasing your tail, I will let you know." Jeanette says when she first met Mark, he ordered coffee, black. Jeanette got a hot chocolate. He always teased her in later conversations because it's a very Mormon thing to do. No caffeine. She says he was a good listener, gathered all the information on her concerns, and immediately knew which resources to dig into. She said, "He made me feel like I was in good hands." Jeanette says she messed up during the investigation a couple of times. Nervous, jumping the gun. She says Mark was quick to let her know that she'd messed up. No nonsense. Because of Mark, I have 2 audio recordings with Jeanne. One is a phone call conversation he requested between Jeanette and her mother. Jeanette taped it.
I was thinking about this the other day after we talked because when you were, you always have looked extremely healthy and, bursting with vitality and all of that. And yet, of all of the kids, you were really the only one who was ever very sick and it was almost always something that nobody could ever figure out. I remember going through a lot of appendicitis tests with you because you had, mysterious pains in your stomach. This was when you were about 12. And they said that your appendix was in a little different spot then.
Another is when Mark went to Jeannie's house to confront her about his investigation and an impending exhumation of one of the husbands.
And I would like you to tell me the truth.
Good. Because I am completely innocent. And I hope that you exhume all of the bodies that are necessary because there is nothing in any of them.
Okay. I appreciate your time, Jeanne.
I hope that makes me go away feeling that I'm not really a monster.
Jeanne says there, "I hope that you go away feeling that I'm not really a monster." Such a curious thing to say. Anyway, I'll be using both throughout this podcast. When you hear Jeannie's voice, just know it came from one of these 2 recordings. I want to point out that Jeanette sounds a little different here than she did when I met her in person. She tells me she was in a car accident and had taken something for the pain and was in a neck brace.
Hello?
Oh, hi.
How are you this morning?
Oh, I've got an ice pack on my neck, but, holding it. I've got an ice pack between meetings. Matt did talk to the accountant, so that's all handled.
Okay, good.
And is Bruce asleep or awake?
He was laying back down.
Oh, so is he around?
Yeah.
Not.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Prior calls with her mother led her to believe now was the time to ask her these questions. She says she knows her mom and felt she really shouldn't wait. Anyway, that's why she sounds different. Here's Jeanette confronting her mother about the reaction to the salt shakers that Thanksgiving.
I have no clue about that. I don't even remember.
There were all the ones with the red lids, and then you were like, which one should I use? Which one should I use? then you pulled one down and there was like all this weird stuff in the salt, and you go, oh, I don't want to use that one because I dropped it on the floor or something, and you scooped it back in, and then you're like, well, which salt do I use now? Okay, so then you like reach for another salt, and you go, okay, this is a good one, so I use this one. So I was like, well, what was in that salt? It kind of freaked me out.
I have no memory of any of that, hon. If there was anything, sometimes moisture gets into salt and it won't shake out very well.
These were like brown dots or something, or like bigger than dots. But then I thought, well, maybe I'll just see what they are. So when I came back at Christmas, then all the salts were gone.
I don't.
Don't you have a whole? Okay, so look in your cabinet sometime and see if you've got. Where do you buy all your salts with the red lids?
She tries again.
Oh, with the red lids, there's onion salt and garlic salt, and those are spices.
Oh, I know, but these were it was like salt, and then you were trying to figure out which salt to use. Remember how I said I wanted to use the Thanksgiving salt, or the holiday salt and pepper shakers?
Uh-huh.
And then I said, actually,
I still use them.
Yeah, so I said, well, which salt should I use?
Oh, one of them was salt and one of them was pepper. They looked just exactly alike.
Oh, no, but this one you said that you didn't want to use this one when we opened it up because you said one of them had fallen or something, and you scooped it all back in. It was like white with stuff in it. I mean, it kind of messed with my head.
Your head may possibly have been kind of in a weird place to begin with. I don't know.
It wasn't before I got there, but then when I saw the salts, and then I got really sick, and then all of this, I'm like, what in the world? With all the other people getting sick, then it made me wonder what. So I thought, well, maybe I'll see what's in the salt, and then it was all gone at Christmas.
This call lasted about an hour, and of all the things Jeanette confronted her mom about that day, and there was a lot, Jeannie called back later to address one thing: the salt.
I called you back because I remembered the
mystery you said.
Salt and pepper, because what I told you was that I remember when I was fixing lunch over here, because I had the red topped salt and pepper shakers.
Uh-huh.
And I was telling you about the fact that one of them had the top had fallen off of it.
Right.
When I was cooking, and I was peppering something, and a whole bunch of pepper got in there in the food, and I had to scoop it all out. And I was telling you that I had to be really careful as to which one of those I used.
Oh.
The top fell off of some of them. So that's the mystery.
I knew there was something. Okay, well, I'll let you go take care of Bruce, because it sounds like he's aware. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
But they were going to pour the salt into the holiday shakers. The lid being loose didn't matter, right? In a later email, Jeanette confronts her mother bit by bit about this story again. In frustration, she writes, "I'm not mad at you anymore, and I don't think you're evil. I think you just have an illness called Munchausen by proxy. I wish I could help you, but you won't let me." Minutes later, Jeannie writes back, "I also certainly never tried to make Bruce any sicker than he was." Jeanette sends this back, "I know that I am not crazy, and what you are saying about that is so wrong. I'm trying to understand you. Why don't you tell me?" The first story about the salt: number 1, you told me it was dirt. Number 2, you told me you didn't have any salt shakers like I described. Number 3, you told me it was pepper that had fallen in. Number 4, you told others that I had accused you of switching salt shakers on you at dinner and trying to poison me. Number 5, you told me it was sea salt. How do I wrap my brain around so many different stories? Help me understand this. Her mom, Jeannie, replies, "In the bottom of my heart, I doubt that you are, quote, crazy. but I still don't know how you could accuse me of such horrible things. Jeanette has saved every medical record, legal document, every note and email. There are hundreds and hundreds of those. The emails. She saved them all, believing it was a matter of life and death. And as you'll learn, Jeanette, the daughter, pushed time and again to get to the truth. I have access to all of it and have done my best to sort through it, looking for answers. Oh, and I have several chapters of Jeannie's history papers, as she calls them. History, in quotations. Is that because portions of these stories are made up to fit a new narrative? Or is it because the version of your history is yours? It's through your lens. You can't help it. It did stick out, though. Here, I'll read a paragraph from one of them. In schoolwork during second grade, my papers were marked 100% or all wrong. You did not read directions. I worked fast, usually too fast, so I could have time to read. I'd become hooked and read dozens and dozens of books in school as well as at home. I have my parents to thank for this love of reading. Frequently, my dad would bring home comics from the drugstore where he went for his after-work cup of coffee. Mrs. Turner, who owned the drugstore, would roll up the unused comic books and sell them 5 for a dime. My favorite was Archie, but I enjoyed Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and all the others too. Mom contributed to my love of reading by reading to me. My favorite was when she'd read poetry from her old American literature books. Never mind that I didn't understand the deeper meanings. It was the sound of them that I'll always remember. As I'm going through the recorded conversations, I hear Jeannie offering up her writings to Private Detective Mark Nozak.
When I get my investigation done, like I said, you'll probably be the most famous woman in the United States. Probably. You know, they'll probably make a doggone movie after your life as a result. But that write-up that you're going to send me could be a really interesting lead-in.
I have several chapters, but I wonder how many exist. Some aren't labeled, just dates, but others have titles like Dennis, her first husband, or the early years of church membership, AM or FM, and then there's Cherish. Jeanette says her mom was obsessed with reading, the likes of Stephen King, John Grisham, Ellery Queen, and a favorite, Agatha Christie. She topped the list. She says her mom, Jeannie, would get on the waiting list at the library, get home, and hide herself between the covers of these books. So to think this woman, who seems to me at times to talk in riddles and code, was writing her own mystery novel through the years, well, it fits. Jeannie graduated with an English degree. 4 years of college? No, she graduated in just 2. Everyone describes her as so smart. Jeanette and David talk about the things that alarmed them throughout their parents' marriage. Separately, one thing that was realized during my interviews was that Jeanette was isolated from family functions. Her siblings, 2 sisters and a brother, and Bruce's children, were told Jeanette was too sick to come to family gatherings. Jeanette spent plenty of time at their house, yes, helping support her mother during Bruce's illnesses, but big family functions with both sides? No.
My dad was such a family man that we always had family events. He was always putting on a party like in his backyard and cooking. We were cooking for everybody, and he would, I remember he used to order like these big inflatable slides with they had like this wet slide, and the grandkids. I mean, my dad was all about his family and grandkids, and so there was just constant celebration. So it just seemed like everybody was, happy and enjoying each other. It was, kind of nice, even I guess getting an extended family that we hung out with once in a while.
Minus Jeanette. They were all told her MS and mental problems kept her from being there.
During my dad's life, I did not have the opportunity to really spend quality time with Jeanette. I spent a lot more time with the other 3 siblings, but talking to her now, it's really good to hear that she, first of all, does not have MS. Second of all, does not seem to be like she's in a mental institution, seems to be successful, and I'm happy for her. It seems like she's living her life and actually healthy. And just hearing from her telling me how she and her family have never had any of the health issues since they cut off ties with her mom. It's nice to hear.
Isolation. I find a lot of examples of that with Jeanette concerning her mother. Jeanette, even if she didn't have all the pieces, questioned everything, and it appeared her mother worked to keep her separated from others with stories of sickness and mental problems. But Jeanette says her mom depended on her, would call her all of the time to come up and visit, stay, and help. Even before Bruce, Jeanette says her mom leaned on her for help and money. Her biggest confidant, not the other kids, her. I tracked down Jeanette's best friend from childhood, Rayanne, who recalls how Jeanette struggled.
Oh, this is what happened to me. Now I see it happening to him. Or this was a weird situation, and she would describe an event, and then she would say, something's just not right. You could tell she was piecing things together and just trying to figure out how to stay safe, too. That's another piece of it. How do you stay safe? Am I safe mentally? Am I making this up? Am I going crazy? Or is this really true? Am I physically sick? I'm physically having these symptoms. These things are happening to me, and they seem to correlate at these certain times when I've been up to visit my mom. Like, it took her a couple of times to figure that one out. Like, oh, that's when it happens. Now, why is it happening? And then try to figure out why and how to avoid it. And I have to say our conversations would be like maybe 2 or 3 times a year. So there was a lot of time in between where I'd talk to her and then she'd be like, okay, this is now what I think I'm seeing. I'm like,
Staying safe. After hiring the private detective, Mark Nozak quickly realized Jeanne was potentially a danger to society and alerted the local police in Smithfield, Utah, who then turned it over to the FBI. In an email he wrote, I have a sworn duty to serve and protect, and I did something today that may upset you. But it had to be done. March 2006. Jeanette's husband, Matt, received a card from Jeanne for his birthday. There's a $20 bill inside. They were well off, and sending Matt a dad of $20 was kind of weird. At least that was my initial thought. Anyway, Jeanette describes what happened next.
I mean, this was all when I'm trying to figure this out. And I opened up the card very carefully, like barely touching it. And when I opened it up, there was a $20 bill in there. And I kind of let it fall. I didn't even touch it. And the $20 bill had reprinted part of the numbers very faintly onto the inside of the card.
Jeanette called the private investigator.
He goes, that's impossible. That's not the way money works. But he took the card. They turned it into the police up in Smithfield.
It was never sent to the FBI and never tested. Jeanette says the local officer commented that he didn't even know what to do with it. In fact, at the end of the investigation, Jeanette says the detective asked her if she wanted it back. She was so upset that she said no, but she wishes she had it now.
So the candy came at about the same time.
Jeanette received some Easter candy from her mom in the mail for the family. Jeanette tucked it away in her closet. Maybe the FBI would want it, she thought, but she didn't ever offer it to them. She started feeling like a crazy woman for thinking that there might be something in sealed candy. Jeanette says this was a very confusing time for her. After a few weeks, Jeanette decided to get into the candy. I have beeped out Jeanette's oldest daughter's name at her request.
And so to my shame, then the kids were running around.
Her youngest daughter was 2. Her oldest daughter was 6, almost 7.
Luke was 7, almost 8. He was 8 in March. He turned 8. And I thought, you know what? Matt's working late. I need some peace. So I said, if you guys are good, you can have some Skittles. So I went and checked them. I mean, I squeezed the bag and I poured it into 2 Dixie cups or little cups.
Her oldest daughter ate the candy. Her youngest daughter had an immediate negative reaction.
I took a bite and she spit it out and she said, yucky. And then they went to sleep. And then I thought, that's weird. But this functional blindness is weird. I didn't see it. And so the next day, my kids came out and they were acting up again or whatever. And just like kids, goes, can I have the rest of those Skittles? And I said, yeah, if you can, be good and calm down.
She again asked her youngest daughter if she wanted some candy.
She goes, yucky. Gave him to, she ate him. I went and took a nap because I had been up so late the night before. When I got out of my nap, then said, Mommy, I can't see. I said, what's going on? And I didn't really even hear her. I sat down. She sat up on a bench. We pulled her up beside me and she knocked her milk over. And I go, what happened? Why did you knock your milk over? And she goes, I didn't see it. And I go, you didn't see your milk? And she goes, no, I can't see. And I go, whoa, what's happening? I go, Matt, when did this happen? He goes, oh, I didn't know anything about it. I was just making lunch. I walked far away and I wrote a couple of big letters on a sign and I go, okay, what does this sign say? And she said, what sign? And I went, oh my gosh. And so I got up close to her and her pupils were so large that you couldn't even tell what color her eyes were. And I said, Matt, this is an emergency run now. We went as fast as we could I took her. He stayed with the other kids. I took her into the Instacare right there in American Fork. They put this eye chart up and she goes, I can't see the chart. And they said, listen, we're close enough. We would air flight her to Primary Children's, but you need to drive as fast as you can, which will be fast. Get her to Primary Children's now. There's something. She's been poisoned or something. And I go, oh my gosh, I think she had some, and all of a sudden it was no longer a mystery. I just handed my daughter poison candy.
She flashes back. She'd eaten some chocolate robin eggs candy from the box a few weeks earlier. She had gotten sick, weak, and suffered hallucinations. The family had to postpone their trip to Disney because of this. She'd been so sick for so long, it didn't immediately register. Thinking back further, they were mailed Halloween candy from Jeanne back in October. Jeanette says everyone was projectile vomiting. It all came flooding in at once. Her husband, Matt, says so much came flooding in for him, too.
For me, it was always everything circumstantial. There's no way to prove it. So it was like, it could be true, but there was nothing at that time that was like, yeah, this is definitely happening. And I think around the candy thing, it was like, okay, this is so messed up. And it is like, yeah, this is real. And all of a sudden it's like losing her vision and out of the blue. And then, Jeanette taking her to the, children's hospital and them looking at it being that it was poisoning. And I also recall looking for the wrappers.
But Jeanette had poured the candy into cups, and they couldn't find the wrapper anywhere. Her daughter couldn't see. She was falling down in the hospital. Jeanette was so scared. Jeanette paid a lot of money to have the private detective Mark Nozak get the robin eggs, that chocolate, tested by a lab. I have those results. It hit high on arsenic. She was then able to have her daughter tested for arsenic. And even 14 days after the initial symptoms, her test came back positive for arsenic. The little girl was officially diagnosed with toxic optic neuropathy. She also couldn't see certain colors on the chart, red and green, something Jeanette had struggled with during previous episodes. Her daughter had vision problems for 6 months after eating the candy and fell behind in some of her accelerated classes in school because she couldn't see. She still suffers from migraines. When confronted by the private investigator, Jeanne was quick to point the finger in another direction, away from herself as the person who could have messed with that Easter candy.
My theory about the poison on the candy. My theory is that it was Matt.
Matt? Well, first of all, we've polygraphed them. We put them on polygraphs. And I mean, if I put you on a polygraph, what would the polygraph show?
It would show that I know absolutely nothing about it.
Matt, Jeanette's husband at the time, the kids' father. Well, I asked him about this.
The reason for that was because I'm a chemist. That was her just throwing out, other possibilities that I would have the know-how to like poison someone. And so that's why that was done. But the FBI never questioned me regarding Jeanne's theory.
Private Detective Mark Nozak gets very direct about the tainted Easter candy.
You did send the candy, and there was arsenic in it.
I did send the candy.
And there was arsenic in it.
Later.
Huh?
Later, there was arsenic in the candy.
Later? No.
After I sent it.
Oh, no. It was when you sent it.
I sent candy to every grandkid all the time.
Well, you got to understand something. This house, I've had testimony from more people who have come to this house and walked away very, very ill. It's not because of your cooking. It's not because of your cooking, okay? I've talked a number of people who walked away from this house very, very ill. And they all have the same symptoms, all of them, same symptoms. And those symptoms are what are caused from arsenic poisoning. Okay? And I'm going to be able to prove that.
Within the hundreds of emails, Jeanette works to verify nearly every story, slowly, methodically. This is one story that's addressed a few times. Jeannie tried to explain how maybe Bruce's medicine spilled into the box of candy, or maybe cleaning supplies, and that she was not the last one to handle the box. And then this email in Jeanette's inbox. New Year's Eve, 2006, talking about a conversation with an investigator. He said that the private investigator struck everyone in the office as one of those guys that's trying to play upon the fears of the person who hired them, convincing them that there is something to it, and they need to keep having him investigate so he can keep getting money from them. He said a lot of investigators are like that, and he wouldn't even be surprised if that guy had dabbled a little arsenic on the candy just to keep the case going. You need to consider this. Why do you still have him? Mark Nozak refused to take another penny from Jeanette after turning Jeannie's case over to police. An email a month later from Jeannie. Jeanette, I think you are being taken advantage of by someone, probably that private detective. I'm sorry you're having such a rough time over all this. At this point in time, Jeanette says her mom had been weaving stories to her siblings and to Bruce, saying she was off her bipolar medicine. Jeanette has never been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. In an email from 2013, Jeannie wrote, I really want to set the record straight here also. I don't know where you have heard that I wrote letters or talked about you in a mental institution, being bipolar, not taking medicines or anything like that, but it isn't true. Just as the only explanation that you could think of as to why I would poison people is that I must have been on drugs or abusing prescription meds, which I was not, nor was I poisoning people. The only explanation that I could think of as to why you would accuse me of murder and trying to poison you is that you must be having some kind of mental breakdown. The FBI kept asking me for a motive behind your accusations of me, and that was the only reason I could come up with. I knew you didn't hate me. I just couldn't understand why this was happening. The FBI told Jeanette that she should not talk to other family members or to Bruce's family during the investigation as to not jeopardize the case. Isolated. Jeanette tells me she was alone in this fight and that no part of her wanted to be right.
I remember telling him, I said, please bring me back a report that says I am crazy. Please. I would rather be crazy than whatever I think is going on right now is going on, because this is pure hell. Please give me a pill and make me better and make this go away. And he said, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to happen.
In later emails, Jeanette writes to Mark she couldn't get the salt containers at her mother's house out of her mind. Couldn't shake it. She writes, after I looked through a bunch more seed pictures, I decided to investigate this seed that I found that looked identical to what I saw in her salt from a picture. I would have to see it in person to make sure that it would grind to a powder on the edges of the salt container like I saw in a few that had gotten crushed by the cap being screwed on. The seed that I saw and investigated was from a plant called Atropa belladonna. What I found out about the seed made me really wonder if I'd found the right thing. I got the chills last night. Atropa belladonna means beautiful lady, but apparently it's officially don't mess with a beautiful lady and is the second most poisonous plant in the world. It's supposedly untraceable and causes all the symptoms that we were experiencing. Anyway, I attached a file with pictures and some things about it. Not 100% sure, but I think it might be. End of email. Agatha Christie. Belladonna was the poison of choice in her novel, A Caribbean Mystery, the focus of a short story, and The Labors of Hercules, and quite a few more. Belladonna almost immediately targets the nervous system. Who loves a good mystery? Next time on The Toll. Poison Control.
And he said, and the headaches, the splitting headaches. He goes, my head hurts so bad.
Jim left her and died. Jim left her and died.
Half of the people at Christmas were violently throwing up.
Oh, I must just be a bad cook because people keep getting sick.
And I don't know where to draw the line, and everything is her fault and nothing's her fault. But I'm saying this was weird. This was very odd.
Thank you for listening. The Toll Podcast, Season 2, Poison Control, is a production of The Toll, LLC. Creator, investigator, host, and audio producer, me, Nancy Simpson. Executive producer, Pamela Shelby. Original intro and recording by Jay Lashley. Special thanks to Shelby Powers for assisting with web design and original brand identity. Music by Fesleyan Studios. Reproduction or any part of this broadcast without the express permission of The Toll, LLC is prohibited. Get updates at our website, thetollpodcast.com.